Thanks, John. Thank you, John, and good afternoon. It's a delight for me to be here with you, and thanks, Sema, for bringing us together to think about some of these future directions. And that's what's important for us all, isn't it? In this era of fast-moving change, of trends that have these speedy life cycles, to keep an eye on the shifts, to survive, to thrive in this non-stop quest for relevance in which we find ourselves. Innovation, adaptation, reinvention, that's what it's all about. I think being here in the Powerhouse is an example of reinvention. Just looking around, I was just thinking about CKL when he or Cuda tagged their tags some years back in a dusty, abandoned Powerhouse. Who would have thought that some years later us business leaders would be staring at their tags in a new fit-out as this venue has found great life as a function centre. But that's what reinvention is all about, and that's what we have to be about as well, having that vision for change and being prepared to thrive amidst the changes that we see. I think December is a great time for us to look back on the year that we've had, as well as prepare our thoughts for the year and the years ahead. We just put out our Trends of 2013. As social researchers, we do a bit of this analysis. We just put it out yesterday, actually, and so I can tell you that the word of the year, from our perspective, is that word selfie. When you take a photo of yourself, it was even added to the Oxford English Dictionary this year. It was popularised by the member for Griffith, just down the road from here, during the election campaign, you might recall. It's become mainstream. The fad of the year we put down as the onesie. And if you don't have a onesie as part of your get-up, you might want to get one, because no doubt there'll be a onesie party for you to wear that gear at some point. The food of the year, food trend of the year, we put down as froyo. If you've not had some froyo, as they call it, frozen yogurt, well, you're missing out. Lots of the froyo bars have emerged around the place, the moochies and the wow cows and the noggies and Yogi Berry and the like, so it's quite the trend. And the Harlem Shake was our internet fad of the year. If you haven't seen it, it's very 2013. Prepare yourself for 2014. That's where we're headed, future direction. So don't worry too much about those fads if you miss them. But it is important to focus on the future and prepare ourselves for what's next. So I've been asked to give a bit of a snapshot of the changes and the trends. And so I've got here 5 trends that are redefining consumers, that are transforming customers and mindsets that we would do well to understand so that we can engage effectively with them. And I think it is important to not just take one trend, but 3, 4 or 5 to triangulate on the future. You can't get to the future by just following one narrow trend line. I was reading a book, a futurist book written a few decades ago called How to Survive the 80s. So we're definitely going back in time with this book. And they had some great trends that they identified, but because they just took one trend and wound the clock forward, they missed the realities of it. In this book, the author wrote about the emergence of the automation era, and that was true in the 80s. There were labour-saving devices that came around. He said that based on this, these labour-saving devices entering the workplace, by the turn of the century, by the year 2000, the work week will have declined, and you can expect to be working on average just 3.5 days per week. So I hope that one came to pass for you. Probably not quite. He also predicted the teleworking phenomenon, and again, he was correct on that. With the dawn of the computing era of the 80s, the PC era, people could telework, and we've seen that really come to the fore just in the last couple of years. But he took it too far when he said, based on this growth in teleworking, again, by the turn of the century, we will have so many people working from home and so many fewer working in the CBDs of our cities that parking problems and traffic jams will finally become something of history. So I'm sure in downtown Brisbane that's the case. No parking issues anymore, everyone's working from home. Well, not quite, because technologically we could work from home, but psychologically we don't want to. We want to connect and interact. Technologically we could have had a webinar this afternoon, but sociologically we want to gather and network and interact with each other. So we get the future, we get those trends, the future directions, by looking at the multitude of the trends and where they intersect. And I guess if we think about change, the first front of mind trend would have to be technological trends, because that's what defines how we work, what we carry in our pocket, how we interact. Indeed, are these technologies, and the growth in them just in the last couple of years has been phenomenal. We have new words in our lexicon that we didn't have a few years ago. We talk about putting things in the cloud, or grabbing an app, or sending a tweet, or checking a status update, social media and the Twitterverse. It's new words that have emerged with these new platforms. And just look at the numbers on that: 4.7 billion Google searches per day, 4 billion YouTube views per day, more than 1 million apps now available on the App Store. Words that didn't exist are now mainstream platforms on which we interact. But I think what's interesting, what we need to understand, what's transforming consumers, is not so much what technologies we're using, but how the use of the technologies has transformed mindsets and attitudes and expectations and processing focuses. I mean, have a look at this shift from the literate to the visual. A close number 2 in terms of the numbers there is YouTube. It's the second biggest search engine on the planet. You've got a whole emerging generation that Google within YouTube, because they don't just want to read articles on something, they want to watch a video about something. They consume information in that video form. Our app of the year was that app Vine. It's a Twitter-owned and launched app. Twitter has made famous 140 character messages, short-form communications, and with their Vine app, it's also short-form, it's 6-second videos. So we're in a time-poor society. It's communicating and getting cut through in short-form ways. It's visual and video-based forms. It's convenience through the app platforms. I put down here this little infographic highlighting that the smartphone has become the primary device for actions and outcomes that we achieved on other devices in the past. For the under 25s, the primary navigation device is the smartphone, as it is for telling the time and for getting the weather and for photography and the news headlines. This one device has become the catch-all for those other areas of life. And so we've got fragmentation of consumers and we've got convergence of devices. We've got a shift from the single channel to the multi-channeling of communications and engagement. Mobile has become more important than ever. Digital more important than ever. And so the shift from DM to now, of course, EDM. And so engaging with consumers in the new platforms in the ways that make sense for you. This is obviously key for your marketing. These are the channels that you interact on today that we couldn't have even foreseen as little as a decade ago. 61% of Gen Ys have used a smartphone in a store to go online shopping. Showrooming, as it's called. The breaking down of the barriers where you're using a smartphone in a bricks and mortar store to go to a click store to check prices or consumer blogs. This is what we see today. This is the new world. And so engaging with consumers in this environment is a challenge. It's not one size fits all. It's not just one homogeneous group of 23 million Australians or 9 million households, but actually there is more fragmentation than ever. And so the segmentation matters to connect with consumers today. That's the reality of our era. I mean, just look at some of the numbers in terms of how we're bombarded with content these days. The IBM Big Data study came out earlier in the year, and they say that there are 2.5 quintillion bytes of data created every day. So you've got millions, and then you've got billions and trillions and quadrillions, and then you've got quintillions, 18 zeros on it. That's a big number. And that's how much data is created in our world every single day. That is so much data that they say that 90% of the information in the world today has been created in the last 2 years alone. This explosion of content in our world, and that is the terrain in which you're communicating. And so to get that cut through is important, and to have that sophistication with the marketing, to find the ways and the means to multi-channel to engage is obviously critical for us all. The traditional forms of communication aren't getting cut through these days. I mean, we're in an information-based era, we're in a science-based, evidence-based era, and yet of the 2 million academic articles published in our world in peer-reviewed journals annually, 1.6 million of them, the majority, are never cited. I guess a fair proportion of those articles are never even read. And so it's not about the quality of the content, but how you communicate the content that matters. It's an argument not of the what, but the how you engage and connect. And if it's just long-winded content, if it's statistical tables, if it's formal, structured delivery, it's probably not going to get the cut through in a busy and message-saturated era. Even if we turn our eyes to our shores here, there are almost 7,000 PhD theses completed in Australia every year. Based on the average word length, do the multiplications on that, that's about 500 million words of quality research put out by Australian PhD candidates annually. And yet, again, because of the form in which it sits, those long-winded theses, it's great content that is not easily accessible. In fact, the average PhD thesis in Australia is read just 4 times after all of those years of work. I was doing some quick numbers on it. I thought, well, that's very interesting because the average PhD assessment panel in Australia has 3 people on it. And normally you've got between 2 or 3 supervisors who are up to 6 people and the candidate who's written the thing. So I'm not sure who out of that group isn't doing the reading, probably a few of them. But that's the challenge that we face, disheartening as it is. How do we get cut through in this era? How do we engage in a message-saturated time? Well, the technologists have taught us a lot. We know that technology increasingly is using visuals and symbols to get cut through in the global world. Have you noticed that they don't put words on the devices anymore? P-L-A-Y. They use the symbol. The triangle tells the story. Stop, pause, play, record, it's all communicated through symbols. And when they invent new technologies, they come up with new symbols to communicate that. And so it does cut across language barriers and literacy levels and age groups and countries to communicate globally in a very simple way. And you see that visualization of content and information spreading to other areas as well. In the real estate world, they aren't using long-winded descriptions anymore, but the icons tell the story of how many bedrooms and how many bathrooms. And I did grab this from a real estate ad, and I'm still trying to work out how beneficial that extra 0.5 of a car space is. Is that marketing that's gone crazy? But nonetheless, that's how they communicate, through the content, they communicate content through the images, through the symbols. And I think as we connect with the new generation, we have to connect that way as well. So new channels in personalized forms across mobile and digital forms with visual content as an increasing base. That's what's working these days. But I guess we've always had visuals, but I'm not talking about these sorts of visuals. These are the equivalent of cliches in visual terms. We've got to find ways of connecting. Sometimes that's through stories, sometimes it's through real customer anecdotes, sometimes it's through video form, sometimes it's just through some pictures that can communicate your content, or through a great innovative execution of a campaign. That's what's going to get the cut through. We surveyed Australians thinking about cliches and asked them what are the most annoying cliches that they have heard in the last year. And managers are very guilty of using cliches. A lot that were on the top list are favourite phrases of managers, phrases like push the envelope, or hit the ground running, or cutting edge, or steep learning curve, or fast track. So we've got to watch these cliches. But I found that the people that are the most guilty of using cliches, from the list of Australians as surveyed here, actually were politicians. And I've got here the top 10 most irritating cliches. And I found that when I read this list from beginning to end, it made a pretty good political speech. I think I've found the secret of what the politicians get up to. Here's the top 10. We won't be ruling anything in or anything out, because at the end of the day, there's no magic bullet, and the jury is still out on that anyway. But having said that, can I just say, moving forward, it's a no-brainer. For working families, we'll give 110%. Now, meaningless communication, not a bad political speech, but you get the point. It communicates nothing in that. And we are in that sort of world of message saturation. So the question is, in this world of technology and more content than ever, how can we get the cut through? And keep in mind, the people with whom we're communicating are changing as well. There are more people and more diversity within our population than we've ever seen before. I guess this is why segmentation matters. This is why if you can get some deeper intelligence around your database, or let Sema do that, that's going to help you effectively communicate with them, because it's not one size fits all anymore. There are 23 million of us in this globally connected nation of 7 billion people in our world. And it was earlier this year that we hit this recent milestone of 23 million, pretty significant population that we have here down under today. And we probably marvel at the growth of our world without realising that actually Australia's been tracking the same global growth trends. In fact, it was exactly one generation ago, you go back to the year 1966, that the world was half its current population, 3.5 billion. But in that same year, Australia was exactly half what it now is, 11.5 million. So that means that in this generation span of time, since 1966, not only has the world doubled its population, but Australia has doubled its population. we've been tracking the global growth. And that global growth includes all of those developing countries with big birth rates. And actually, Australia is growing faster than the global average. The world's growing at 1.1% per annum. Australia's growing at 1.8%, slightly down on what it was just 12 months ago at 1.9%. So pretty significant population growth that we have going on here. And with that growth, with more people, more households, more localities than ever, we've got to work out how we engage with them. I put down Australia's growth compared to comparable nations. In the last century, Germany has increased its population by just a quarter. Now, they're larger than we are, but their growth has been significantly smaller than ours. And growth has an impact in terms of communities and settlement and how we connect and who the makeup of a population is. The UK in a century has gone from 44 million people in 1913 to 63 million people currently, an increase of just on a third. Sweden has increased their population by 3/4. And I put Sweden up here because in 1913 their population was larger than our population. They were at 5.5 million, we were still at 4.7 million people. And yet in the century since, they've gone from 5.5 million to 9.5 million. And we've gone from 4.7 million to 23 million people. And so our growth compared to the rest of them is gold medal winning performance right there. Give us another gold medal just for that. It outstrips every other developed nation on the planet. So that's pretty significant population growth. And how are we growing? Well, we're setting new records on the natural increase side of things. We hear much about the ageing population. That's true. That's a key factor of Australia. But we're setting national birth records at the moment, 300,000 births per year, well above the peak of the original baby boom of the post-World War II years. And we're living longer than ever as well. So with the longevity rates combined with record birth rates, natural increase is setting new highs. A lot of people find it interesting to hear that the standardised death rate has actually been declining for the last 3 decades. A sign of us living longer, being healthier longer and lasting longer. I should point out that that is the standardised death rate, that's death per 1,000 people. The individualised death rate still hovers around 100%. We can't do a lot about that. I've tried to manipulate the figures, but it's always a 1-for-1 ratio, so that's just the reality. But look, if it makes us feel better, the standardised death rate is declining. We're living longer, and that's a good thing. But as much as the natural increase is pretty solid in Australia, a bigger proportion of our growth right now is the net overseas migration. We're growing even more through migration than natural increase, and so we're more culturally diverse than we've ever been. 1 in 4 of us was born overseas. We've kept that ratio roughly for about half a century. We've always been culturally diverse here in Australia. I put in some of the infographics that you'll get later, household diversity. So even if someone was Australian born, if a parent or two was born overseas, that's going to create their cultural identity. That's perhaps going to influence language spoken at home. So regardless of where someone was born, that household cultural diversity is an important measure. And if you look at all households that have one or both parents born overseas, we're up to 46% of our total population, almost half. So pretty culturally diverse Australia. So we're growing, and there's increasing population density, and there's record births, and there's increased longevity, and there's increased cultural diversity, and there's also an increasing ageing profile that defines us. If we go back 4 decades, this was what was called our population pyramid. An apt label because you can see our profile is very pyramid shaped. From the younger generations where we had more people to the older generations where we had fewer people, you can see it's a pretty clear pyramid shape. If we wind the clock forward 4 decades to this year, you can see the change in the makeup of our population. More middle and older Australians relative to the population than ever before. Let's wind the clock forward another 4 decades to the middle of the century, and that's how we will look. By the middle of the century, we'll have more people aged over 65 than people aged under 18 for the first time in our history. This inverted population pyramid. And so big shifts in our population, which means a different makeup of customer base and new attitudes with those customers and new ways of connecting and engaging are required. We're growing and we're aging. We're changing in terms of the diversity and the generational transitions. We're moving from a household perspective, from a vocational perspective, more frequently than ever before. We're connecting up with global growth and global trends. In fact, just highlighting global trends, it's amazing how a trend emerges from some part of the world and quickly washes over our shores. I mentioned the trend of the year for us, the online trend was the Harlem Shake. And there's a lot more of these trends that, of course, begin somewhere and quickly go global. An event a couple of years ago was planking, or a meme, a little online fad. You remember that theme that took off? People would lie like a plank and take a photo of themselves, put it online, and it started this whole internet phenomenon. And I've put up here our analysis of the Facebook data, the mentions of the word planking, and you can see prior to May 2011, it was a term that didn't exist. So in our research, we thought, what was it that kicked off the whole planking phenomenon? Let's get to the bottom of it and find out what began this little crazy thing. And I think it was an accident. I think it was something that happened out there, and people thought, that's a cool thing, I'm going to try that out. And so this whole thing went global. Came to Australia, went around the world, but then about September it died off, and I was thinking, well, what was it about 4 or 5 months later that brought the whole thing to a screeching halt? And it's, as often happens, it's when they started planking on those morning TV programs, and that sort of shows how mainstream it is, and that kills it dead in its tracks, and no one's planked ever since. But it's a reminder not to be the last planker out there. You know, you don't want to be caught doing last year's trend when the world has moved on. And I think keeping up with the trends, but more importantly, understanding the attitudes that are behind them is important for us all. You know, no sooner had the planking meme died that the next one emerged. The next one that I saw was photo bombing. You know, you try to take a photo and it doesn't work out as planned, and this squirrel began the whole thing. The couple had set up the auto timer shot, and the squirrel jumped in the way right when the photo was taken. They thought it was funny, put it online, and then other people started going through their holiday photos, looking for things they'd never noticed before and putting those online, and it started this whole photo bombing meme. And within days there were thousands of photos and millions of views, and then a few weeks later that one died off, and I think the next one that I saw was dogs that looked like their owners. That was a bit weird, and quickly died off. It was too strange for everyone, I think. But you can see the speed of these things, the global nature of these things. That is the world that we're in. We're not just down under and isolated by the tyranny of distance anymore. We're connected to the new centre of global growth, of economic power, of population growth, where 60% of the population lives in Asia. And we are connected right strongly into that. Well, the third trend are the generational trends or transitions. The baton is being passed from a household perspective, from one generation to the next, from a consumer perspective, from an employment perspective. We've got new generations entering the workforce. If we look at our population profile and band the population off by generation, you get a picture of where we're at. We've got at the top here the oldest generation, the builders generation, and aptly labelled. They have been the builders of our society, the builders of our economy, of our infrastructure, of our way of life. They worked hard. They were shaped in the Depression years. They were born and shaped in the austerity years post-World War II. And probably because of that start in life, they were the builders. They had a work ethic and a loyalty and a commitment, and that marked their track, and they continued to build and contribute to this day. But they've largely exited from the full-time workforce. The baby boomers dominate the workforce at the moment and the leadership ranks. More than a third of the full-time workforce are baby boomers. But you can see also the baton is being passed there based on the age range. By the end of this decade, the baby boomers will be half their percentage share of the workforce that they currently are. And Generation X have moved into the workforce and are moving up the leadership ranks, and are the largest generation in the workforce currently. But Generation Y are coming through in big numbers. Those in their 20s and moving into their 30s. They're moving into the peak family years, in the peak wealth accumulation years. They're moving into leadership years, and they're moving into the workforce. They're 1 in 5 workers now. They'll be 1 in 3 workers by the end of this decade. And so connecting with Generation Y is critical as well. And they, of course, have been shaped in a very different era to the previous generations. We have a saying in social research that people resemble their times more than they resemble their parents. In so many ways, that's the case. Here, a generation that was shaped perhaps like the baby boomers in the 1960s is going to look different to a generation shaped perhaps like Gen X in the 1980s. That's different to a generation being shaped in this 21st century with technology and social media. And so we have a different generation emerging. For Gen X, it's about 1 in 4 of those in their late 30s, early 40s have a university degree. If we look at the older Gen Ys from 25 to 34, 1 in 3 have a degree. So an increasingly educated society. Based on current employment trends, with Generation Z, today's students at school, it'll probably end up for them to be about 1 in 2 with a uni degree. So we are communicating with an increasingly educated society, more skeptical, more exposed to marketing and messages than ever before, more technologically empowered and more empowered to push back and question materials. We've got to therefore communicate and engage with them in therefore a more sophisticated way. I was talking to some Generation Ys, and they were telling me a story that had emerged in apparently a prestigious private school around the traps. A little fad had emerged with particularly the Year 8 and Year 9 girls. They were putting lipstick on in the bathrooms, and they were kissing the mirror. It was sort of their tag, their mark in society. They didn't use the spray paint like we have in the room here. They were a bit more moderated than that, but they still wanted to have their impact, and so they'd put the lipstick on, kiss the mirror, and that was their way of, having an impact. Well, this not only was a violation of school rules to have lipstick in the school, but also it was disrespectful of school property. So the principal had a sign that was made, girls, desist from kissing the mirror. Well, that sign didn't stop the mirror kissing, the problem continued. The cleaner would go in to clean the mirror and even had a word with some of the girls, but again, it didn't stop the problem. So finally the principal said, look, I'm out of my depth with this generation, or I just can't quite connect with them. But she called in the school captain, 17-year-old, said, look, you're part of the same generation, maybe you can solve the problem. The captain said, not a drama, I'll have it solved today. So she went into the bathroom and she called all of those Year 8 and Year 9 girls in, and she said, as they crowded around the mirror, she said, look girls, this kissing of the mirror has got to stop. I've been empowered to solve the problem. And she said, so what I'll be doing each day is cleaning the mirror. And let me just show you how I'll be cleaning the mirror. And she grabs a toilet brush, which she dips in one of the cubicles there, and she then scrubs that mirror clean. And of course, the problem was solved from that moment. Never again did anyone's lips come anywhere near that mirror. It was a very innovative solution in the way that I think only Generation Ys can bring. Sometimes understanding the generation and involving them in the solution is the best way of engaging with them. And if that's complex, we've got Generation Z coming through as well. They're the teenagers and the children currently, but they'll be about 1 in 6 of the workforce by the end of this decade. So connecting with them is important as well. Well, I thought I might get some interaction with you and get you to see how well you're up with particularly the youngest of these generations. I've got a bit of a quiz here for you, and maybe with the person beside you, you can decipher these words. This is slanguage. This is Gen Z speak. They speak a different dialect of English, you might have noticed. They shorten a lot of words. Dis and defs and probs and whatevs, this is how they roll. So the question is, what's dis? And cron, what is this? And soz, what are they talking about there? And cray cray, I've found out it's not a seafood dish, but what on earth is it? And who are the rents? And what's lol and for shizzle? What are they talking about? I'm going to give you 20 seconds with the person beside you to try to decipher as many of those language terms as you can. Well, let's test your answers, see how you went, speaking Gen Z. So firstly, this term dis is short for disrespect. That's good. Cron is short for chronic. Okay, good. So sounds bad, but as you have with the ironic language of Gen Z, it's actually good. It's like it's fully sick, or it's majorly ill, or it's wicked or warped. If things are bad, they're good. That's how it works with them. I wrote a book on this. It's one of those books in the book pack there called Word Up, a lexicon of 21st century language. And you'll find that there are other terms that sound good but actually are bad. So if you do hear a Gen Z, just in the distance they're describing you as a real hero or a winner, it's not good, okay? Just thought I'd point that out to you. And soz means, and cray cray means, very good. And favourite term over there, I can see. And who are the rents? And lol is laugh out loud, very good. For shizzle means for sure. There you go. So you are up with the Gen Z language. This is impressive. Hopefully we're using the right way. Some baby boomers are still using lol for lots of love and causing all sorts of intergenerational problems, particularly when the young nephew's going through a tough time. You send him a message thinking of you, LOL. laugh out loud in my grief. This is not good. So getting the language right across the generations is key for us all. Well, that brings us to the fourth of these 5 trends, social trends. Where are we living? How are we living? What are the life stages that we move through today? In the span of a generation, the life stages have significantly changed. The markers of adulthood used to be measured by marriage and mortgage and children and career and locking into that earning capacity, and yet that's not the case today. It's not in the early 20s now, it's been pushed back, these markers, to the early 30s. That's the median age of marriage, the median age of having children, also from an early 20s something life stage to the early 30s. And we see this with leaving home, we see this with the markers of getting a career and locking into a mortgage of the past as well. So there's this down aging at the latter points of life, the extending of adolescence, while at the younger edge there's an up aging or a commencement of the adolescent years earlier. You no longer just have childhood, teenagerhood, adulthood, you've got in there the tweens, the 8 to 12s. They're older than their years would suggest. They're sort of like the teenagers of a generation ago. They're brand aware, they're fashion aware, they've got the technology, they're empowered, they're influencing parental purchasing decisions. We found in our research, in a lot of our focus groups, that actually the children are influencing parents' purchases, even over things that once the parents made the decision on, like the car that they drive or the holiday or the house that they buy. The kids have more power than ever. And then you've got the teen years, and then you've got the young adult years, because the teens turn into the mid-20s and the kids are still living at home, they're still in education, they're still delaying the earnings of their own. Eventually the mid-20s becomes late 20s, sometimes early 30s, and the kids are still at home. That's when you move from the young adult stage to the Kipper stage. And Kippers is an acronym, Kippers. It stands for Kids in Parents' Pockets Eroding Retirement Savings. So just keep in mind the Kipper reality that's going on in some households. Then you've got adulthood, but of course that is a time of change and reinvention, career changing and down aging and redefining those life stages. We're all younger than our years would suggest. In fact, it was just last month that the MAP came out from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the measures of Australia's progress. And they show very clearly that we're living longer than ever before, and we're younger longer from a mindset perspective. In the last decade, we've added 2 years of life. In the last 40 years of time, we've added 10 years of life. So in the span of a generation, we're 10 years younger. We've added 10 years of life expectancy. So it's actually the demographic reality that 50 is the new 40, and 40 is the new 30, 30 is the new 20. I haven't heard anyone say 20 is the new 10. At some point the metaphor breaks down there, but you get the point, that we're younger than our years would suggest. And so we can't take the 20th century definitions of age groups and apply that to 21st century communities and societies, because we're younger than those chronological years. And so we see changes in the housing tenure where people are living as well. About a third are paying off a mortgage, a third fully own their homes, and about a third are renting. But if you look at the trend lines in this, we've got big growth in the renting numbers. People renting longer in life, later in life, renting sometimes for life. If that works out in the lifespan of a Gen Y, if someone is going to be a lifelong renter, that means that they will move across probably about 25, 26 different homes in their lifetime. That's a lot of churn, that's a lot of change, that's a lot of movement. In fact, the type of tenure of home determines how long we stay. The average renter in Australia stays 1.8 years per abode. This Australia Street infographic is straight from the census data, and you'll find it in there. We said, all right, let's say Australia was shrunk down to be a street of 100 homes, 100 households. What would it look like? And if that was the case, about a third of the street would be renters staying about 1.8 years per abode. Even those that have bought the home, they've got the kids, they're putting their roots down in the community, they don't stay in that house like our parents did, buying a home at the start of their working life, starting a family in that home, raising the kids in that home, becoming an empty nester in that same home, sometimes owning that home for 30 years or 40 years. That's not the reality today. The average person with a mortgage or household with a mortgage stays just 8 years per home, and then they upgrade, they move to something else. The kids get older or more kids come along, they upgrade once again. That's the reality. Those that have paid off their home have stayed longer. But we stay on average, 2 years for the renters and 8 years for those with a mortgage, we move across more housing than ever. So again, ensuring that the database is up to date, ensuring that customer base is efficient in terms of the communications is critical because of the mobility of housing, and with that the mobility of job as well. Where are we living? Well, these are the 5 categories across which the ABS defines our situation, and most of the action is in these little red dots, the major cities. That's where 2 in 3 Australians lives. But don't forget the 1 in 3 Australians that lives in regional Australia. And we sometimes think that it's all about the growth of the majors and the regions haven't been doing well. But actually the areas in blue here, which are defined as the inner regional areas, have been growing very strongly. And in some years they've been growing faster than the major cities. The inner regional areas are very strong at the moment. And it's not just the coastal regions, some of those inland regional cities in terms of growth outstripping some of the capitals. And on this little population map, I tried to cram as much information as I could there. You'll see Toowoomba, for example, an inland regional city that is growing very quickly. So that's the story of Australia, growth in the major cities, growth in the inner regions. The outer regions, as marked in green, haven't been doing as well. In fact, a lot of people have been moving from the outer regions to the inner regional population centres for lifestyle reasons. And the bulk of the land mass there is covered in yellow and grey, the remote and very remote areas, which encompasses just 4% of the total population, even though it's the majority of our land mass. So connecting with the major cities and, of course, those regional growth centres is key to connect with the customer of today. Well, that demographic analytics is important, but I think you can even learn from things like Google Analytics. And I've put up here the most asked questions by Australians on Google in the last year. Now, this gives a little look at the psyche of our nation. What keeps us up late at night? What are we wondering about? What are the big issues on our heart and soul? And the most asked question by Australians in the last year was this question here. What is Gangnam Style? So a real deep searching, a real yearning of the existential search going on. As you can see, the next question on the list, the most asked why is question. Why is my internet so slow? And I'm not kidding, this is straight from the Google Trends data. So big issues on our minds. And I think there's even a link between these two. So many people watching these banal YouTube videos that are slowing down the bandwidth for everyone else. I was just coming through Singapore a month ago, and if you've been to Singapore, you know that they love their rules over there. No chewing gum and no spitting, and lots of signs around to notify you of those rules. And I see that they've added to the signboards of late, outlawing other things as well there. So fair enough. So they should. Third on the list here, in addition to the what is question, the why is question, is the when is question. When is Father's Day? No one is Googling when's Mother's Day. We all know that from a young age. But Father, we get a bit vague on, but did I miss it again like I did last year? I better Google it to check. Oh no, okay, not till September. So most people got there in the end. The most asked where is question. I found this one fascinating. Where is Chuck Norris? Now, it's not that there was a major news event, he's gone missing and you didn't hear about it. This is tapping into that online meme, right? These memes really drive a lot of this online behaviour, and there's this whole Chuck Norris meme, that 1980s action hero with all sorts of slogans that people add to the photos to just remind us that he's a tough guy. In fact, if you type into Google, where is Chuck Norris, and click on the I'm feeling lucky button, it takes you to a page. It says you don't need to ask where is Chuck Norris, because Chuck Norris will always find you. He's a tough guy. He doesn't. I was reading. He doesn't need Twitter. He's already following you. So he can do a wheelie on a unicycle. I was reading. That's how tough he is. And apparently, when Alexander Graham Bell invented the phone, he already had 3 missed calls from Chuck Norris. I mean, he's the tough guy. Chuck Norris doesn't wear a watch. He decides what time it is. Right. So there's like hundreds of these phrases about Chuck Norris. Apparently he's already been to Mars. That's why there's no signs of life there, because Chuck Norris has already been there. So he's a tough guy, and people are searching that for that bit of humour. Which brings me to the final area, attitudinally. What defines us as customers? Where are we at? And how do we connect with the technological change, and the demographic change, and the social change, and the generational change? What drives behaviour these days? Well, I think we have to communicate, market, engage, so that people see it with the eyes of their head, but also with the eyes of their heart. We can't just connect cognitively. Our campaigns have to connect viscerally. They have to connect emotionally and not just rationally. When you look at, again, these top trends of the year that we've just been putting out, most of those trends are things that connect with the heart, not just things that connect with the head. We put down our technology trend of the year as kinesthetic devices. You know, everything is touch screen now. It's fingerprint scanners, it's eye tracking software, it's gesture control mouses. Technology is interacting with us. It's carried on our person. And what we do online is connect through social media. We connect with people. It's music and videos, it's icons and visuals. It's connecting here and not just here. And our campaigns have to do that as well. I think that's the power of print. Indeed, it's still got that power because it's visual, it stands out, it's tactile. Of course, it's the power of digital as well, because you can communicate across the multi-channels and you can really engage with customers today. I thought I'd finish with 4 R's of effective communication today. And I think the first is keep it real, keep it authentic, keep it fresh, to really engage with customers these days. People are looking for what's new. They want to be on the cutting edge. They don't just want something that was old reserved to them again. I was passing through Adelaide Airport about a month ago and saw this sign in the bathroom. Adelaide Airport uses recycled water for toilet flushing. Do not drink. Now, I wasn't tempted to drink, but that's an example of a sign that sort of somehow the message got mixed up in the communication. It lacks a sense of reality. Secondly, keep it real, but keep it relevant. What you say, how you say it, how you engage has to be relevant to connect with the ever-changing consumer, has to connect with that segment that you're targeting. And there are lots of examples of the need to update things because times are changing so quickly. I found a sign online that might have been relevant in the past, but no longer is. If you see someone drowning, now that's a stick figure of someone, help, I'm drowning, they got their arms raised. It's clearly a stick figure of someone in the waves, but we don't read it like that these days. In the year of lol, let's say if you see someone drowning, laugh out loud. Now that's of course not the right response when someone is in trouble out there in the water, but that is a sign that might have been relevant then, isn't relevant now. We have to update our communications to connect, our styles to engage, if we're to be relevant in the changing times. Keep it real, keep it relevant, keep it responsive. I mean, sometimes we even have to tweak campaigns as we're going. We have to change the branding or the approach because we're getting the feedback that it's not working. We run the research, you test the ad, and then you find, you know what, that's not getting the cut through that we thought it was. And so being responsive to the changes is important to remain relevant. I think that's a hallmark of Australians. We're innovative, we're entrepreneurial. We can be responsive to the changes that we see. It's a no worries, we'll sort it out sort of culture. And we've really got to embrace that. I found an Aussie entrepreneur came up with a solution recently to a new workplace situation. Some people in corporate workplaces, you go to the fridge and they've sort of taken your lunch or taken some of your condiments, apparently, in some cultures. Well, in terms of negative workplace culture, well, this guy has invented this anti-theft Ziploc lunch bag. He prints black paint on the outside, so you can see how it solves the problem. That lunch is not safe, but no one's going to mess with your lunch there. That is totally safe, and it's a great responsive solution to a new workplace challenge. Which brings me to the final of these R's. We've said keep it real and keep it relevant, keep it responsive, and finally keep it relational. That old saying is so true. They don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And so the relational nature of things is such that the customers need to know that you get them. You're responsive to them. You're connecting with them. You've got intelligence around. You're not just bombarding them with messages, but actually you know a bit about them through the intelligence of the data analysis that you have, and you're meeting their needs. That's the relationship that they want and expect. That's what maintains the trust, and that's what will engage with them. We're in a social media world after all. Be the first of your friends to like this post. I think that's taking it a bit too literally, but nonetheless, you get the point. I thought I'd conclude with 2 final quotes for you. I was on a website looking up some examples of people who didn't keep up with the trends and the changes, and I found a few Aussies were mentioned on this craziest things ever said site. Found a famous Australian golfer who emerged in the 1980s. In social research, whenever we report, we only use first names because you've got to protect anonymity so that you don't know who this famous Australian golfer is. We'll just use his first name, Greg. And he won his first golfing tournament, first major in 1980, and upon receiving the award, he said, I'd like to begin by thanking my parents, and in particular, my mum and dad. So I'm not sure what that was all about. Well, here's a famous model from the 80s and 90s in Australia as well. Again, first name's Elle. And she was in an anti-smoking debate, and she summed up her whole argument by saying, look, smoking kills. And if you're killed, you've lost a very important part of your life. But I thought I'd leave the final words to 18-year-old Stuart, who was in one of our focus groups, and we were testing communication, which wasn't working. The print communications were not connecting with his generation. They'd just done the one-size-fits-all approach, and it wasn't engaging. And finally, about an hour into the group, he said, look, mate, he said, it's not that we don't care on purpose. He said, it's just that we don't care. He summed it up very, very eloquently. Let's make them care by being real and relevant and responsive and relational. I wish you all the best in it. Thanks for listening.